Welcome to the Playhouse. How are we today? Good to see you here. Also, welcome to the live stream. Thank you for joining us. I hope you've got some questions for us for later on. I have paper notes because I'm old school and I will forget something and it's in very bold type. So please forgive me, but here we go. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started, everyone. While seated, I think we're all familiar with the COVID task of having a mask on, unless you're drinking or talking. You see the little green men? Or is it just me? All right, just check it. All right, so the little green men, they are the ones that will tell you where to go in the case of an emergency. And the facilities, you may or may not have noticed, were on either side of the doors when you first came in. Did you see the facilities? All right, so is everyone comfortable? Are we ready? Excellent. So my name is Bronwyn Boyle. I am your kind of MC moderator for this evening. I am apparently, I'm the Vice President of the Uranquinty CWA branch, and I'm the Secretary of Riverina Bluebell. I love this story. I'm going to tell you a quick story. Many years ago, I'm going to say 14 years ago, 15? There was a few incidents in regional areas on farms, and a number of farmers got together and decided they would form what is now Riverina Bluebell. And the first to put up their hand for the seed money was the CWA. The CWA, whose husbands and brothers, uncles and fathers and grandfathers were struggling. And so the CWA said, how can we help? So when CWA announced they were doing a Sconversation, Riverina Bluebell, pretty handy to have someone in both camps, said, how can we help? Anything they need. And so today, and I'm going to go out of order because I've just mentioned one of the partners being Riverina Bluebell, so I'm going to skip ahead a little, sorry. And I'm just going to mention the partners quickly. So today wouldn't have been possible without the CWA Uranquinty branch, Riverina Bluebell, the Charles Sturt University, Wagga City Council, and Wagga Women in Business. So thank you to our partners for their sponsorship and how they've helped us with today and putting it on with what is a very, very important conversation. Oh, sorry, I forgot one. The Regional Development Association, sorry, RDA. The recipients of the monies raised today will go towards the Wagga Women's Health Centre and the Rural Outreach Counselling. So two very deserving organisations, and thank you so much for supporting us and coming along live today. Oh, I spot more scones, do I? So before we do anything else, we've done our bit of homework, and now I want to ask Auntie Cheryl to come to stage and do Welcome to Country. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Yuda Marang, Nadu Jiril Penrith Warajayina, Gawayambana. G'day everybody, my name's Cheryl Penrith, I'm a Wiradjuri woman. Welcome to Wiradjuri country. Today where we are at the Playhouse, we're right on the banks of the Murrumbidgee Billa, the Murrumbidgee River, the lifeblood of our country. I'd just like to acknowledge some of my fellow elders in the room today. And I'd like to acknowledge all these beautiful elders here. I was really privileged to be asked to do the Welcome to Country. We've been through a really shocking couple of years with the COVID lockdowns and all the isolation, and I think it's a really important way for us to reconnect is to have these really important conversations and have it over a scone even better. So I think what we did through isolation is we checked on each other and rang each other and FaceTimed, and I think it's probably something that we can keep doing even after we're all free. But I think it's not only for service providers. We should be checking on everybody. We should show care to everybody, and I think that the way that you have come up with this is really fantastic. So thank you. I'd like to acknowledge my elders, past and present. I'd like to acknowledge other Wiradjuri people here, people from other nations, visitors. But thank you for putting on this really important conversation. A really important concept for Wiradjuri people is Yinjamara, which is respect. Respect for yourself, respect for other people, and respect for country. So I think if we can all have a little think about Yinjamara before we do anything, I think that's really important. Gawayambana, welcome to Wiradjuri country. Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie Cheryl. One of the things that today, I hope we get some rich questions. I've just come from out the back with the panel, and we've been having extraordinarily rich conversation out there, and I'm hoping when we bring them out that we can continue that conversation with your assistance. So to continue that conversation, the tool we're using today where possible is Slido. Has everyone heard of Slido? Oh, there's a Slido I produced earlier. No, not me. So if you've got a phone, feel free to download the app. I'll be monitoring, the questions will be monitored. You can do a thumbs up on a question if that's the sort of question you want to ask, and it will escalate it to the top of the list. So we know how much interest in the question is in the room as well. So that helps us, because we don't have a lot of time together tonight. So these are the instructions for Slido. The hashtag Sconversation is the, it'll ask you for like a pin thing. What do they call it? Something like that. Okay. Thank you. So before we go any further, we've got a few apologies today, and one of them is from Bronnie Taylor, the Honorary Bronnie Taylor. So she's pre-recorded a very quick video message for us, and then I'm going to bring the panel out. Okay? So please enjoy.
Good evening, everyone, and I'm really sorry that I couldn't be there to join you all personally this evening, but it is a pleasure and an absolute honour to say a few words virtually ahead of what I'm sure will be an insightful and a thoughtful discussion. I want to really commend the CWA, in particular the Uranquinty Evening Branch, for putting together this event and encouraging conversations about mental health and wellbeing in our rural and our regional communities. Because over the past 2 years, our rural and regional communities have faced really difficult challenges of enormous proportions. We've had drought, we've had bushfires, had floods, then we threw in a mice plague, and of course the ongoing pandemic. But through it all, our rural and regional communities have shown incredible resilience in the absolute toughest of times. But we know how compounding disasters can be and how they can dim the light of hope sometimes for the impending future. So while many people will not develop a diagnosable mental illness after experiencing disaster, it doesn't mean that they're not struggling, or it doesn't mean that their sense of security, their safety and their mental well-being is affected. So as a government, we're aware that while there's a huge amount of goodwill and support for those in acute distress, the longer term effects may be hidden. So for example, in high rates of depression, PTSD, and the increased use of alcohol and other drugs. So there's a range of strategies that are being deployed to ensure that people in rural and regional areas can easily access mental health services to get the help that they need, so at the right time, in the right place, in the right way. So we've boosted capacity of helplines such as Lifeline, Beyond Blue, Headspace, Kids Helpline in recent years, as well as mental health services in every single rural local health district. And one example of this is the New South Wales Government's provision of the $36.4 million over 4 years for 57 mental health response and recovery specialists across regional and rural New South Wales. And what this means is that we've combined farm gate counsellors and peer support workers into disaster recovery clinicians so that they're always there doing what they need to do in our communities. The Murrumbidgee Local Health District has been funded for 4 farm gate counsellors and peer support workers, plus 4 disaster recovery clinicians. And for our young people, we're developing 25 new child and adolescent mental health response teams, and these are called Safeguards, and they go right across New South Wales. So one of the first 11 teams being established, 7 are in regional LHDs, including here in this health district. The pandemic has also accelerated our investment in telehealth and virtual care. And I know that while living in the country offers many benefits, it can also mean that you can be some distance from health services and the wait times can be longer than metro areas. So rather than replacing face-to-face consultations, virtual care provides more options and more convenience, and it's an adjunct to, not a replacement of face-to-face. So it means that people don't have to drive hours to go in a clinic, and we actually see many people in the city opting to have this virtual care option now. So it will enhance care to specialists, and that can be particularly important when someone is really unwell. And look, I also have the great privilege to be the Minister for Women. So thank you, CWA, for all the work that you do to empower women of all ages and all demographics. Because we're really pleased to announce the Women's Economic Opportunities Review with the Premier, Treasurer and Minister for Education last week. And what that review will focus on is increasing women's workforce participation and enable flexibility. So thanks again to all of you for the opportunity to say a few words this evening. I'm really sorry I can't be with you, but before I go, I just wanted to reiterate my thanks to the CWA, not only for shining the spotlight on mental health in rural and regional Australia, but for all the work that you do in your communities, the fundraising, the advocating, and just lending a helping hand wherever needed. You're always there for all of us. So ahead of your 100th anniversary in April this year, know that your efforts are very much appreciated by myself, very much valued by myself, and also by the New South Wales Government. Have a terrific night, and I look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. Thanks a lot.
Okay, it's time to bring out the panel. So tonight we have with us Dr. Joe McGurr, the member for Wagga Wagga. Danica Lays, the CEO of CWA New South Wales. Leanne Sanders, the CEO of Visual Dreaming. David Post, the board member for Rural Outreach Counselling. And Genevieve Suak, the Community Health Promotions Officer for ACON. So, here we are. We're going to resist eating the scones on the stage tonight, everyone. I thought to kick off the question time that, Danica, could you maybe take us back through Sconversations as this is what we're doing?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Thank you very much for having me here tonight, and hello to all the CWA members in the audience. It's great to be here and see you. The Sconversations concept was something that we came up with a couple of years ago. I didn't come up with the term. I was talking to a friend of mine we were reflecting on the work that CWA do in their communities to create community connections and, just have those informal conversations that go on, and the benefit of that to communities. And anyway, through that conversation came the term Sconversation, and I just grabbed onto it straight away. I thought that's such a great concept because we are 100 years old this year, and there's many branches right throughout the state who have been having those conversations, as we call them, with their communities and with people in their communities without even, and providing real mental health benefits, probably without even knowing that they're doing it. It's just something that happens when you're engaged with CWA or when CWA is providing services in their area. So we are really pleased to see this Conversations concept take off. We ran a statewide campaign a couple of years ago to encourage people to have those conversations with those that they love and people in their community. And we are, as I said, really happy to see the whole concept grow even more.
So you as a panel, you're not on your own tonight. We have some honoured people in our audience this afternoon, evening. Michael McCormack, our local member, is here. Before I get it all completely wrong, we have Dallas Tout, the Mayor. Where is he? There you are. And also Dan Hayes, okay, on local council. And a number of, I must admit, I am so touched to see so many of the elders here tonight. There are many of you, and I understand there's a couple of name changes, so I won't read everyone's names out. But we have a number of people in the audience from various services, from Riverina Bluebell, from Rural Outreach. We're also, we've got Mates Helping Mates. So there are many. So thank you all for being here this afternoon and helping the panel along with their questions. So we were also sitting out the back and, you know, our conversation morphed a lot, didn't it, guys? And it got from maybe a bit more of a clinical conversation to then an actual conversation. And it was really interesting to see how that arc went. So today I wanted to maybe talk to Leanne, if you can kick it off. One of the things that I'm really interested in is how the community, the Indigenous community, because I don't hear a lot about that, deals with mental health within their own community.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm definitely not an expert, but I suppose I have my experience and the elders have their own. But for us, like, mental health isn't just about mental health, and we can never really put an end to suicide and depression and mental health without actually acknowledging culture as a really important value within that, and supporting young people to be able to connect back to the elders, country, and supporting them with their identity. And so, yeah, we've been really lucky to have inspirational elders like Honey Cheryl that is really passionate about helping the young people. So they are the champions. So any mental health services that really need support around Aboriginal clients and youth, our elders are our experts. So reach out to them.
You've done it now. That's fantastic. They've got a few questions coming in. Is anyone having any trouble with Slido? Everyone happy with where they're at with Slido? Got your questions going? I've got a few. They're starting to queue up, so...
You don't actually have to download the app. If you just go to...
Oh, yeah, sorry. My fault. I knew I'd do that.
Sconversation, you can just write your questions in.
Yeah, slido.com in your browser. You don't have to download the app. That's my fault.
And if somebody would really prefer to ask the question on the microphone, just stick your hand up and I will run it down to you.
Thank you, Tony. Has anyone got a burning question they'd like to ask right now? Okay, then I'm going to go with one I've got here on Slido. So I've got a question here from Anonymous saying, COVID is obviously the topic that has consumed our lives in the past 2 years. What long-term impacts due to COVID do you think you see on our children? Who would like to tackle that one?
I'll kick it off. I think from what I've seen is the increase in anxiety, like that isolation and that wondering what is going on. Like they are very aware that everyone's hit the panic button 2 years ago, and 2 years down the track, we still seem to be living in that. And so everyone's wearing masks, everyone's isolating themselves, whether they, and it's not just because they've had COVID, it is, there's been this incredible push that people not gather together. And I think that in itself raises anxiety. And so when people's anxiety is raised, it triggers off a lot of other things. And I think Leanne started to talk a little bit about that out the back. And I think that when people's anxiety and young people's anxiety is increased, then we see a lot of transference between other young people, but then it also increases anxiety within parents and that. So we see this whole sliding effect. And so I think it's a conversation around people's anxiety. And I think that possibly, even if tonight is not just about mental health in itself, it's about a conversation. So this conversation could go in lots of different directions and that. So, yeah.
Can I make a comment? One of my daughters, Natasha, has just become a teacher in Victoria. It was her first year last year. What a year to pick. Teaching year 3, and very exciting, but they had a lot of lockdown. And she was talking about her class, and I mean, honestly, I don't know how you run online teaching with year 3s. I mean, I'm in awe of her. But one observation she made was that when they came back from that into the classroom, they almost had to relearn how to interact. And the only reason I mention that, I don't know what the long-term effects are going to be, but it did highlight to me how important it is to learn those skills, I think, about interacting, and how important that is for your own mental health. You know, the capacity to relate physically in conversation with a group that supports you. So I was a little bit worried when I heard that. I mean, I think they will regain those skills. But we have transitioned, haven't we, to a world in which a lot of stuff's online. And the nice thing about tonight is that we're actually in a room beginning a conversation physically. And it seems to me that an important part of mental health is actually making those connections physically, and that the efficiency of an online world might actually be detrimental to us in the long run if we cut off from all those physical connections. Just an observation.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many diverse things. It was almost like it's a pressure bubble, and some things seems to have kind of popped out as an issue. But Genevieve, you were having some, like I was just listening to you before when you were talking about the people that you're with, but you also, your history as a mental health nurse and your time in now in ACON. And you put it so beautifully, your definition of mental health, and I would really like you to share that. I almost wish we'd had that conversation out here just in front of everyone. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. So, first of all, I think COVID has completely taken a toll on everybody in our world, and I don't think we will ever go back to like our idea of normalcy. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that it's allowed people to be more kind and considerate and compassionate. And I think that as horrible as it has been, there are positives that's come out of it, and there are things to look forward to. But for me, mental health is sort of there's a difference between when we talk about mental ill health and when we talk about mental health. So everybody in this room has mental health, same as you have spiritual health, financial health, physical health. And mental health really is just about how your brain keeps itself healthy. And I've forgotten the point of my...
Well, you gave a really great definition, and it all kicked off because of the word normal.
Yeah, so I have beef with the word normal. I don't think it exists. I think that we all exist on a spectrum. So obviously I'm here representing ACON. So as a queer person myself, my belief system is very much about existing wherever I flow, and that is my queer identity, and it really goes into all my other identities as well. So for someone who experiences mental ill health and has a diagnosis, I think that like there is no normal for me. There is just how I'm coping, and there is how I'm doing, and if I'm not okay, it's okay, and if I'm doing great and I'm on a panel, then it's okay as well. Like it's just about where you're at and accepting that, and like using your community to empower you in your feelings and your emotions and your experiences because they're valid.
Yeah. Yeah, language can be quite loaded. And, you know, I had so many conversations in the preparation for coming tonight for this Sconversation. And one of the common themes that came about was language, and how language can be a barrier in having a conversation with someone. So if you're worried you're going to say the wrong thing, it can really stop you from asking the question you want to or need to ask, because you're scared you're going to ask it in the wrong way. So I'd be interested to hear from each of the panellists from your own expertise or your own area, your thoughts on that. And I'm sorry if you feel like I'm throwing you under the bus, but it's interesting because we all have a shared language depending on where we're from and what we do. And when we're trying to apply that language in somebody else's area, it can get pretty tricky. And the language becomes the thing that trips us up, not the point we're trying to get to. So we can start with Leanne. You're nodding profusely. Go for it. It's all yours.
I'm agreeing with you, I suppose. Language is really important, even within clinical settings as well, like assuming that someone is understanding what the next steps are. Like if you go to a doctor to have a mental health plan, making that assumption that they know how to navigate that. But then also within just a conversation with people that you trust, I think asking the hard questions when there are concerns, asking it is much better, of fear of asking the right way. It's much better than just leaving it and something happening and, kind of feeling like you've got to live with that. Not that you do, but, you know, if things aren't so well, if that makes sense. And so if you don't know how to ask, even asking someone else on how to ask that question.
Thank you. David?
I think too, like going back to the original question of the impact on young people and that, I see their resilience is far stronger than sometimes our as adults. So that what I've seen with young people in lockdown and being taken away from school, and school's been closed down for a while, is that they lose that ability to have that conversation with their social groups. And so therefore, when they go back to school, again, it raises the anxiety for a little while. So it is a little bit like it's okay to be okay and recognise that. And so I think that the conversations that young people have, we should allow them to have that, like right or wrong. Like they mightn't use all the right language, and a lot of them don't use language that we understand, and that's okay, because that's the way they're expressing themselves, and that's their way of getting back into their school groups and their sporting groups, and that. So when you take that away for a while, it like becomes very isolating. And so it's like, get back into it again. And conversations, and the conversations at home are not necessarily the same conversations that they're having in their social groups. So allowing them to express themselves is really, really important. So again, it backs up what has been said here tonight.
I think too, like even just for young people to understand, when your heart is racing so fast, they don't know that that's anxiety. Or when their brain is feeling like they're confused and in a fog, they don't know that that's a sign that they're stressed as a young person. And my 6-year-old, when he seen a discussion on the news about anxiety, he looked up like he wanted to know more. And I think these symptoms of mental health need to be talked about so that these kids can identify, my heart's racing and I'm having struggle to breathe, so we can support them on how to take deep breaths or take time out.
Look, I come from a very medical background. I trained as an emergency physician, and my first experiences were treating people with mental illness who presented at the emergency department. Later on, I was in health administration and in fact, ran the mental health unit here in Wagga for a number of years. So my mindset's always been that mental illness, and we used to talk about it, mental illness, was another disease that people had, and that you just needed to treat it. And so the focus of the whole health system and my own mindset for many, many years was we just need to get more treatments, more hospital beds, more drugs, more psychiatrists, and so on. And of course, we desperately do need the right treatments available for people. I'm not saying we don't. But I have to say, it becomes a bit of a never-ending saga when you start pathologising. And as Genevieve said earlier, when we start pathologising and creating it as something abnormal and treating it as a disease, we fail to appreciate that actually, first of all, we need a lot of prevention. And secondly, we start pathologising normal symptoms. As Leanne just said, you know, if someone's stressed or anxious and their heart races, well, that doesn't necessarily mean you've got an illness that needs a set of drugs. And yet we almost have a mindset in society that if you've got an illness, get a drug, get some sort of treatment, you've got to be better. Whereas really we need to be thinking, I think, about prevention and care by the rest of us in community. And that's the language of illness means that we don't take, I think as a community, we sometimes don't take the responsibility we should to care. We kind of stigmatise people and we say, oh, well, they had this breakdown, or they're struggling with depression, they need to go see a doctor and get treatment. Is that the right approach? Because that isolates people. And I think if we're going to cope with stresses in life, you need a community, you need your family, you need people around, you need to be able to talk. Anyway, it concerns me that you asked about language, and I'm just saying I think we medicalise. And I think, Genevieve, you were saying something similar earlier, that we medicalise a lot of this and it's not helpful. And that's why tonight's good, because hopefully we're having a conversation where we can bring that out into the open.
Well, one of the things... Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more, Joe, here on this, getting a few ticks, so that's great. And I think part of what you're saying is like by labelling things, we get to distance ourselves from them and not take responsibility for how we can help. And as part of the prevention or part of that journey of someone who may eventually get to a service, but there's a long journey between recognising there's a problem and being able to access services. And I'm just reading through the questions here, and there is a number of questions about services, so I thought we might just have a little dally into some of the service questions that we have here. And a number of people are asking the same or similar questions.
Well, before we go on... Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I think that leading on from what Joe has said, it's like we build a stigma within our community, and we need to take that stigma away. And our community, like people within our communities, are the key to being able to take that stigma away. It's not about just getting that medication. There's such a big path there. And a lot of, all through my clinical practice has been, I found conversation in preference to clinical jargon has always been a far better outcome, and it allows people to feel like there's not a stigma attached to them. So when we start putting medical terms on people, and we can't get away from it, but we can avoid it as much as possible to reduce the stigma.
Yeah, and language is so difficult, like within any kind of industry and within any kind of setting. There's so many different kinds of verbal and non-verbal communication that goes into talking with someone. And I remember as a nurse, like how do you feel comfortable and non-intrusive to go up to someone and say, Are you having thoughts of self-harm? Are you having suicidal ideation? Are you experiencing these things? Because it feels really difficult to do. And when we talk about, community and doing that with our loved ones, it's really hard. And it's hard to do it safely and without trauma bonding and without, the correct, ways of going about it and detaching yourself afterwards. And that's why we have clinicians, and that's why we have clinical settings, and that's why we have therapists and professionals who can get paid to listen to that sort of stuff. So it's really difficult. But one point I wanted to make about language coming from ACON is that when you sort of use, say, pronouns, when you use incorrect pronouns, it is sort of it's terrible to be misgendered, but it's so much better to ask and receive the correct pronouns for someone who's trans or gender diverse. And you can do that by literally just asking and saying, what are your pronouns? Or using gender neutral pronouns until they tell you their pronouns, because it is suicide prevention. And when we talk, somebody had a question about young people, and when we talk about trans and gender diverse youth, using correct pronouns and accepting is suicide prevention, and it is being mental health safe and mental health literate.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. One of the hot topics right now is around virtual assistants. And we're not moving too far away from language, because when we start going into the world of technology, it is a whole language of its own. And it's great assistance, but those that are most vulnerable perhaps may not have the resources and the access to the services online. So when things move, the technology moves forward and everyone's moving forward with it, it makes a big gap for those that don't have that kind of technology. How do you see that playing out, Joe, with in the community? And I know that there's a lot of government support and there's a lot of government initiatives around the technology. I'm wondering whether you have something that you can share with us from that.
Look, I think, particularly during COVID, we've actually seen a bit of a revolution, say, in telehealth, not just for mental health, but in relation to medical care more generally. And look, I think that's increased the access for people. I certainly think in area of mental health, telehealth can provide very useful support. Actually, in this region, I think Access Line started 20 years ago. And I remember at the time it was regarded as terrible. People said, we cannot have this. We need psychiatrists on the ground. But 20 years later, it's still operating. And I think it's provided an important resource. And that was just a telephone back then. And now we've got much more sophisticated online technology. And I think that will continue to evolve. And I think it has a place. There's no question. I'd like to see a bucket load of more psychiatrists and mental health professionals in rural areas. But the fact of the matter is that for a whole range of illnesses, not just mental health, telehealth provides a useful adjunct. And I think we should not hesitate to use that technology. What worries me about it, though, is that losing the personal touch, the face-to-face touch, and distancing care options, really. And I think, and what worries me a little bit about it as well, is that it's that distancing of community and support that's so important. And I worry that part of this move to just medicalise an issue that really should be a response from the community. So look, I think those services will continue to grow, and they have an important role to play. But do they solve the problem of the high rate of people taking their own lives in our communities? No, because actually more than half of those people don't actually access services before, unfortunately, they make those decisions. And so that raises the question to me as what's our role as a community? And I think, Danica, you said earlier, you talked about your colleague who always talks about people. Well, perhaps you can tell the story, but it's about prevention, not about cure.
Yeah, absolutely. So a good friend of mine is Shanna Wan, who runs Sober in the Country. She often talks about the quote. There's a famous quote that talks about people falling in the river and us pulling them out of the river, and basically the quote is about us doing the work as a community to stop people falling in the river in the first instance, so that we don't have to be constantly pulling them out of the river at the other end. So we had a really big talk about that kind of concept previously, just before our session, and all of us have our own areas and our own communities and our own personal backgrounds as well. But I think we all agreed that was the important part the community played on that spectrum of what we're talking about tonight. So there are definitely a need for services for those that have clinically diagnosed illnesses that need support, need services face-to-face, if possible, for those with those types of illnesses. But there's a whole time frame leading up to that where community plays such an important part. And when we think about who's responsible for looking after that person on the spectrum of where they might be with their mental health, we are really responsible. Before they reach that point that they might have some kind of clinical diagnosis, we are actually responsible as a community for helping that person and hopefully prevent them from getting to that point. As Joe said, at least half of the people that take their own life don't actually go and seek services, and the other half that do, a large proportion of them will have only a very, very fleeting connection with a service and then decide, oh, it's not for me, and then not follow it through. So there is such power in communities actually taking responsibility for that early intervention that we talked about, and I think we all agreed on that.
Just backing that up, I think that the virtual or the telehealth thing definitely has a place, but I'm always been a huge advocate of face-to-face, and I've spent so many years driving across the Riverina to see people face-to-face, and the benefit in face-to-face I don't think will ever disappear. And I think that early intervention, exactly what you're talking about, is the key, or I believe is the key to being able to move forward. So it's about that early intervention, that early conversations, and through ROC they run the Make Keeper program. It's about volunteers in the bush, looking after their mates. I don't care whether you're male or female, boy, girl, whatever you are, everyone has a mate. And the whole term of Mate Keeper is about communities looking after themselves and everyone in those communities. The earlier that intervention can happen with a conversation, the more likely that there's a positive outcome. Riverina Bluebell is very active in trying to promote that awareness. Rural outreach counselling, there's a lot of services, a lot of the Headspace and a lot of service providers are wanting to provide that early intervention. The problem we find, or I've always found, is people get to a crisis before they take that step, because there's always been that stigma that someone's going to think of me worse than what I am. But a little quote that I've used over the years is that you don't need to you don't need to see the whole staircase. You just need to take that first step. And I always congratulate people when they used to ring and make an appointment, or ring just to have a conversation, that how brave they are to pick that bloody phone up and make a call. And that can be, it doesn't matter whether it's they've just listened to a podcast or whatever at 3 o'clock in the morning on the tractor, they pick the phone up and talk to someone, Lifeline or whoever. It's the bravest move anyone can make. And I think that there's a lot of people in this room tonight that would know someone that they would wish they'd picked that bloody phone up and made a contact. And that starts a conversation.
I think technology, I did a lot of interviewing with young people, and especially young Aboriginal people, and they're more likely to use technology to say that they're struggling or how they're feeling, as opposed to picking up the phone. And so, you know, technology, of course, we still need people, but technology is a tool that the young people are familiar with, and maybe they can be a part of that, I suppose, design of that solution themselves.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that as well in the context of having fit-for-purpose services. So whether that's a young person that would prefer to use technology, an older person that would prefer to have a face-to-face conversation with someone, and all the different, you know, all the different backgrounds of people in between as well, and not having a one-size-fits-all approach. So it's another aspect to think of.
While we're on the topic of that too, oh, sorry, Dave.
Yeah, sorry. Leanne talked about a little exercise that about sitting on the river. Can you talk about that, please, Leanne? Because it's really thought-provoking as to young people and elders and that.
Yeah, so, and we were having a conversation. It's not just about First Nations and Wiradjuri. I think we can all learn from Wiradjuri and First Nations, but just Annie Cheryl Penrith is one of them. She is what keeps me well. Her inspiration, her strength, her resilience keeps me well. But a lot of our young people don't know who they are, where they're connected, and have a really big cultural disconnection. And just for them to be able to sit and be, not even have a conversation, but to be with an older person that does give us that role models that no matter what you go through, we still push forward and we still look after each other and we still be kind. And having that on the river with anyone, especially an elder, is just so soul-filling. And so we were saying, like, you feel disconnected to your country, and if you could sit with elders within your culture, they could tell you stories about India, and you can learn and grow and begin your identity. And I think we really don't value as much as we should how important elderly people, not elderly, but elders are within our community and how they can help with well-being.
Yeah, and I think that the concept of intergenerational trauma is really come to focus in my line of work. Because it lives on in the blood of generations after and within so many cultural communities, and we all suffer from that, and that is mental health in itself.
I was actually coming to you, and identity is so important, and one of the things, there's a few questions coming through on what is ACON. So if, you know, and as a resource, you come to what you spend time in Wagga, and there's a lot of families that have someone in their family and they don't know you exist. So if you could just maybe give us a quick...
Hello, I'm Genevieve. I'm from ACON. A bit about me, I am a relatively new nursing grad, and I decided not to pursue clinical, so now I'm working in the not-for-profit health space. So ACON is the AIDS Council of New South Wales. So it started as a response to the HIV epidemic in Australia. So we have a Victorian version, a Queensland version, all over. And now we have access to PrEP and PEP and so many amazing treatments for HIV. So it's not as big of an issue, still an issue obviously, but ACON now does work across all different types of health. So we do work in mental health, we do work in sexual health, HIV, domestic family violence, alcohol and drugs, for LGBTQIA+ community, allies and peers. So my role is the Community Health Promotion Officer for Murrumbidgee and Far West. So I come out here quite often and do outreach and bring health promotion materials. And I think I've forgotten my point. I had a point. No, it's gone. Maybe it'll come back.
Of course it will. Have you forgotten? No, that's fine. But yeah, that whole thing around identity and how maybe, I know myself, I know a lot of families with young people in their families that are struggling with their identity and especially their sexual identity. And that's causing a lot of trauma in youth.
Yeah, oh, sorry, I've remembered it. When we talked about telehealth, what came to mind for me was how incredibly amazing it is in accessing minority groups and people who don't feel that it's culturally safe to access the services that are available to them. And I think I've found that in my work because I work in regional communities, and as someone from Sydney, it's like, why should you guys trust me? Like, I don't know your experiences being from a regional community, and it can go across so many different things. So if you're from the LGBTQIA plus community, if you are neurodivergent, if you're Indigenous, if you're from the sex worker community, it's like, how do you cater those needs? And telehealth has enabled that to happen. You can call someone from across the country and feel seen, and I think that is amazing and beautiful.
Fantastic. We're getting a lot of questions about services in the Riverina and access to those services. So I just want to, there's one here for each of the panel members. Before we head down the service route, for each of the panel members, would you be comfortable sharing your healthy coping mechanisms for stress?
Sure.
Go for it.
So sometimes I don't always cope that well at all, actually, and I think that's okay. For me, one of the big things in the last few years, and particularly since I've taken on this role, which is I love, and I'm privileged beyond measure to be able to do this role, but can be quite high pressure. But around about the same time, one of my friends, again in my community, reached out and asked me if I wanted to come and play women's soccer, and I'd never ever played soccer before in my life. I thought she was crazy, but I went along, and it took a lot of bravery for me to go along. I had no skills, have some now, but it's still not great. It was really, it may sound like a small thing, but it was actually a really life-changing thing for me. It helped me to connect into a community that I'd lived in for quite some time, but actually hadn't really felt a true part of. So now I feel very, very much a part of that community. And, you know, exercise for me is the thing that helps the most.
Any words of wisdom? All right.
I love my own space. I found the last few years I've picked up reading again and reading non-clinical books. So I can read, and it's got to be Australian. So I'm in love with Australian authors in the last few years. And so I love my space, I love my reading. I thoroughly enjoy just going to coffee with my partner and things like that. Like that, we create our own space. Jump on my motorbike, not a push bike, but a motorbike, and head into the mountains or something like that. So it's important to grab that space for yourself, and I find that helps me.
Cool.
Yeah, I read exclusively romance novels. There's no in between. That's all I can get into my brain. But my cat, I have her little name on my bracelet. She is the joy of my life, and I didn't realize how important to my mental health she would be. I recently started roller skating, and just experiencing like childhood euphoria through that has been amazing, and just like silly little things in my life. But that's when I'm doing okay, and when I'm not okay, sometimes it's being like, hey, I'm too anxious to go out for these plans, so will you come over and watch a movie with me instead? And being honest with Acon, with my manager, and saying I need to take a mental health day, like it's not it. And having that acceptance across the board, not only for the people in my life, but with myself. That's how I stay like safe in my mental health.
Dr. Joe?
You go.
Okay. I think I'm still trying to work it out, but it's definitely a learning thing. But I suppose for me, as a First Nation woman, my connection to spirituality and country is just beautiful medicine. But also, when I am struggling, just sharing that vulnerability. I don't know how many times I've cried and ringing my amazing female leaders that are here, and then not be judged and not worry about that. And I think that crying and that medicine of tears is a part of that medicine as well.
Yeah, it's how do you cope? There's a few things for me. My faith's an important part of that for me. My family is a really important part of that. And I know Karen is going to get into me after and say, "What do you mean? You never talk to me about anything." But it's just because I just know I'm safe there. I just know I'm accepted there. So that's a really important part of it. Look, I love reading, and I'll try and switch off to that. And I went through a really bad period a few years ago, and I rediscovered chess. And I don't know what that did. It just re-triggered my brain, and it was a great learning experience. So, and recently we've discovered caravanning, and I'm hoping that's going to be a great break for me. Not that I'm good at it, can I tell you? But anyway, so yeah, different things at different times, I think, sometimes. Just the most important part's kind of be aware when you're about to get there, and then try and do something different or look for some way to get help, actually. Yeah. I'm not sure I can speak with authority. I'm not sure I'm that good about it, actually, so...
Okay.
I think it's just being aware of what you need. And I read a little thing here that popped up just recently that I've seen years ago, and it said, "Be yourself, because everyone else is taken." And I think that really resonated for me. So just be yourself.
Yeah, Dav's gone rogue. So I've got a question here for you, Dr. Joe. What is being done to address the funding shortfall for mental health services in our region? People, especially children, cannot access the services they need when they need it.
Look, that's a great question, and there clearly is a shortfall in services, and particularly in relation to child and adolescent mental health services, and that's something we need to continue to advocate for. There's no question about that. And it's certainly something that I've raised in the Parliament, particularly in relation, unfortunately, to our people taking their own lives in our communities, can I say, which is very, very distressing. Look, I do want to also, though, make a point, and that is when I look at mental health services that are available now compared to what it was like 30 years ago, you know, there has clearly been a major investment. It's just not comparable, even 20 years ago. Now, the reason I make that point is not that means we should stop spending now. That's not the point. But what I am trying to say is that, in a way, demand keeps growing. And we can keep providing services, and I suspect demand will keep growing. And at some point, we actually have to tackle the issue around prevention, and stop spending money pulling people out of the river, and start concentrating on systems that protect people from falling in the river. And that involves investment in social good, everything from social housing, drug programs, making sure people's incomes are supported. But it also, I think, comes back to the community, and that's why I think this conversation tonight's important. I don't want to skip this issue, but there is a responsibility in our community to destigmatise this, and to make sure that we're all pulling our weight, and that we're all reaching out to help our fellows. Now, look, in the recent times, I've actually been impressed with some of the initiatives that have started here, that the current government has started. The Safe Haven initiative that's commenced just next to the Wagga Base Hospital, where there's a place for people who are being confronted with issues around perhaps taking their own lives, can go without having to go to the hospital. You know, it's a safe space. You're not dealing with clinicians. You're dealing with people who can talk to you at your level. I think that's a great initiative. And there's a suicide prevention outreach team that's been started. I think that's been great. There's been a great initiative here in our Murrumbidgee area called the Local Response Group, which steps into action when there's the risk of, to be honest, a cluster. And that didn't require a lot of extra money. That just required services talking to each other. And that's a unique model here compared to the rest of Australia. But I've seen that operate. Very clever. The community gets affected by a young person perhaps taking their lives. The risk is that spreads on social media. And this local response group forms, it consists of the police, education, health, all of the non-government providers, and they work out what they're going to do to protect the community, provide education, get messages on social media that will stop that sort of stuff spreading. Now, that didn't take a lot of money, that just took coordination. So, definitely we need to invest more in services, but we also need to think differently about how we provide services, how we coordinate services, and I do think we need to invest a lot in prevention, and there's a bit of a community responsibility for that.
Can I just raise something there? And I don't want to kind of come across negative, and I'd like to get one of the elders to just maybe be a part of these questions. But there's a lot of services that we're talking about, but none of them are actually culturally responsive to our First Nation youth. We have the highest suicide rate for our kids. Our mental illness and trauma and intergenerational trauma is the highest. And there's all of these services, but our young people aren't accessing them. And a culture is and identity is what our young people need. And I think government needs to start to put money into areas that the elders identify what's needed to help our young people. Could one of the elders help me?
Hi, I'm Marnie Mary. When you was talking about that, Joe, I was thinking like Leanne and I must have been thinking the same telepathic way, but I was thinking about, like when we have these spates of high rates of suicides and that of young people in our communities, everybody comes in and does something at that time, but then when they go away, what is left? Where's the continuing of that service within that community to deal with the young ones and that are left there and the families that are left there that are still continuing living in this nightmare of going through someone that's taken their own lives or something? Where are the services to stay in that community to guide and help that community and nurture themselves to their wellness, so we're not constantly helping them out of the river? So where are those kind of services in our communities?
Well, I agree. And look, the only thing I could make a comment is that I think the concept that you've got to do that follow-up work has begun. People have begun to realise that, Auntie Mary. I think, and look, I think we do need to support that. And certainly in the local response group that I was talking about, one of their functions was to try and get in and do that sort of work. Now, we need to provide more funding for that. That's exactly right. But on a positive note, I think there is an awareness of exactly what you're saying. But yeah, are we there yet? No. Fair enough.
Can you hear me? Sorry. Kathy Skeers, I work with Dr. Jonathan Ho, who is a amazing GP in Wagga. He specialises in mental health and drug and alcohol, violence, abuse, neglect. He's worked with sexual assault service. He's the forensic lead for Murrumbidgee Local Health District. Ruby is another assistant to Dr. Ho. She's here with me tonight, and he sends his apologies. He's in Tasmania at a forensics conference, but he would have loved to have been here. As first point of contact for a GP, I just want to share what I go through weekly, and I'm getting a bit emotional because, I turn away people weekly, mothers, fathers, children ringing, my daughter, my son, whoever is self-harming, having suicidal ideation. What do I do? I want to see Dr. Ho. I've heard he's the best. And I have to say, I'm sorry, we can't take on new patients. You'll have to try somewhere else. But I've tried every GP in Wagga I can't get in, So I think Dr. Ho's approach is patient-centred care, not service-driven care. But what makes him so special, I think, is he bases everything on a multidisciplinary approach. So it's not just the GP who's taking on these people. He works with all the services. If he can be the GP. Sorry.
Collaboration.
Oh yeah, a collaboration. So, he'll work with a social worker and then someone maybe at Carolika, one of the Indigenous organisations. So he gets a team together. So it's not just falling on the shoulders of the GP. It's expecting everyone to pull their weight. And I think, especially in the rural community, if we can have a team approach to helping these people, it's going to be so much better. But again, it comes back to getting the word out there that the services are available. And I think it has happened since COVID. Awareness is there that there are services, but it's a hard slog. But I think all the services, if we can collaborate together, and we also need to incentivise getting GPs to the bush, which better time, there couldn't be after COVID. So many people are relocating to these areas. So if we can get these, specialists to the regional areas, that's a start.
Can I just say, Dr. Ho works with ACON, and I met him, and he's fantastic. He's amazing, and it's that model of co-design where he will be willing to work with this not-for-profit and be willing to hear the voices from the LGBTQIA+ community and using it to inform his care. And it really is I don't know anything about funding, but for me, I feel like it should be absolutely critical, number one, important for cultural safety to be, and cultural competence to be the front line for healthcare workers. And within that, I don't say I wouldn't expect myself to be culturally safe with everyone, but I have the intention to be, and going in, I'm willing to listen and learn. And so many different communities fall under that. And empowering within the Indigenous sort of conversation, empowering Indigenous people to run those programs and to lead the conversation and to lead, very important, very, very important, because change will not occur otherwise.
I think I'm a big fan of Dr. Ho's too, love him. But from my experience watching what he does, which I think is an incredible practice, is as clinicians, we listen to people's stories, and it's really brave to tell your story and what's going on and what's really happening for you. And Dr. Ho thanks them for that. Thanks them for trust, as a doctor, for trusting him to be open, to say what's really happening, and to see a young person that is really engaged, to hear that from a doctor, it's really empowering for them, because they feel like then they're valued. And he does that so beautifully, and there's no power, it's just an equal level. So
I'm flicking through the questions as you guys are talking, and you're organically answering at least a portion of those questions as you're going through. So it seems we have another question in the audience.
Yes, Julie Morrison, Wagga Evening, CWA. We have a serious problem with counsellors and psychologists in the schools in Wagga, and probably and throughout the state, I do believe. CWA at the moment are trying to push for more of these. I know personally, my granddaughter took a month because she couldn't cope with high school, and it took a month to see them. That's really not satisfactory, and it's the fault of the state government. We are pushing for more counsellors and psychologists in the schools. Some only have a couple of hours, some schools, and they share it with others. It's deplorable. The other thing is, the lady's right about Hobart. We heard that the other day, because I have a family member who needs, who have to get help at times. And I think it's terrible. We've only got 2 private psychiatrists in Wagga. One, I think, comes from Canberra, and the other one here. And you can't see either of them under 6 months. It's disgusting. There is mental health, well, of course there is, and I'm sure they do a great job. but we need more private psychologists too. Psychiatrists, sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Dr. Joe?
Julie, thanks for that, and you're absolutely right about the need for more counsellors, and I know you and I have been in correspondence on that, and you're absolutely right. And we do need to keep pushing for that because those wait times are just not acceptable. There's no question about that. And look, what can I say about psychiatrists? I mean, there was a period back in the 1990s when there wasn't a single psychiatrist in this town, and we had a mental health unit with 20 seriously unwell people in it. It's barely improved since. We do have fly-in psychiatrists to look after the unit, but the maldistribution of psychiatrists to my view, is a national scandal. You know, it's not as though the College of Psychiatrists doesn't know that. But anyway, be that as it may, we need to keep pushing on with that. And we do have, can I just say, we have got a program for training psychiatrists here, which has been a first, which has been great. And I think the New South Wales government's been supportive of networks around training for that, which is a positive, but we're a long way to go. But I also think that in terms of mental health, psychiatrists are an important part of it, but I don't think they're, you know, there's a whole system around it that needs to be in place to look after people's mental health. And sometimes when we concentrate on psychiatrists, we go down that path of pathologising illness that I was talking about earlier. So it's an important part of it. It's certainly something I'm going to keep fighting on. And can I just add, another reason why we need a Department of Rural Health, Julie, to solve that issue.
No? Okay. Dave, can I just throw to you for a second around the recruitment and how counsellors... You've worked in counselling in this area for a very long time, and you've seen the comings and goings of the numbers and the capabilities and the capacities over the years. Have you got something to maybe help with that with the school? I mean, the schools, it's very, very difficult.
The schools are very difficult, and I think Dr. Joseph answered that relatively well, because I honestly don't have an answer about how do we get more psychiatrists, how do we get more psychologists, how do we get more counsellors. There's such a need out there that it doesn't matter how many people get trained, there's still more work. And I know there's a couple of clinicians here in the room tonight, and but I want to go back to a point that was made earlier about pulling people out of the river before they fall in. Like we're really good. We've got problems about people falling in the river, about trying to get them out of the river. But I really have over the years tried to push about that early intervention before people get to the river bank. Like, what's going on there? Why aren't we looking more at that instead of at the end result? And so the early intervention about those early conversations, like allowing that people to feel that they're not going to be stigmatised, and the conversation isn't a stigma in that. So I can't fix the school stuff. I've worked within schools and that, and it is a huge issue. But what we've seen over the years too, it's not just one particular group. We are now seeing it right across every age bracket. 20 years ago, there was definite age brackets of people that were affected more than others. 2022, we see it right across from very, very young children to very, very elderly people, and everywhere in between. So, and I think that one of the things that we may be doing well is maybe being brave enough to put our hand up, and because the issues that we're seeing are not issues that are just 5 years old. These are issues that have been there for generations. And I've spoken to families on farms that they might have an issue that's popped up over the last couple of years with family members, but when you look back into it, that issue has been there maybe 3 generations and maybe longer. And I know that by trying to address things now, it would never have been talked about 20 years ago. So I think we are making steps forward because we are becoming more brave about having those early conversations. And early intervention is our way forward.
So that leads me to one of the questions.
Can I just jump
sorry.
in there? Sorry. My name's Anne and I actually work as a school counsellor, senior psychologist in the Department of Education schools. I'm not here in that official capacity, but the government, there has been election commitments to put more school counsellors in schools and the money is there and we're trying to recruit. We just can't get them to come out. And so our school counsellors, I'm in charge of a team of 7. We cover 22 schools, so you're right, we're thinly stretched. I'm their clinical supervisor. I'm so worried because they're getting burnt out because they are like you guys, they understand, they're getting the referrals, they just can't get to everybody and they're having difficulties too. But it has been an election commitment. I just think we just need, I don't know whether it goes back to, this is a good question since I've got the mic, universities or training, how we can make it look more popular and recruit and train people to come. Can we do that somewhere? Because the money actually is there, the vacancies are there, we're ready to have people, we just can't recruit them.
I'm conscious of time, and one of the questions that has many people wanting to, we've said it, the word conversation a lot, but what does that conversation consist of? So what are the things we can say or do as community members and friends to assist with others' mental health? It's one thing to say, let's have a conversation. We're looking for some help on how do we structure that conversation, or what are the elements of a conversation that would assist people who have someone who's struggling in their family or close to them.
Yeah, I think it's. I'm not sure if I have all the answers, but I think it's a really good question. It's probably a good sort of thing to make sure that we cover tonight, because we talked beforehand about making sure people felt empowered after they leave a forum like this to be able to go and have those conversations and not actually feel, hesitant about them. I mean, I still find myself hesitating at times if I've got friends in that situation. I even find myself hesitating when I'm talking about it in a professional sense, because you're always worried that you're going to say the wrong thing or you're going to describe it in the wrong way. But I think, the point was made earlier that I think, bringing it out into the open, into the light, even if you do say it in the wrong way, is probably, on balance, a better thing to do than actually just not talk about it at all. So, we're not the experts at CWA, but we definitely, as I said, through this Sconversation campaign, we want to encourage people to actually think about asking people, are they okay? Think about dropping in, having a cup of tea with someone. All those little acts can mean a lot, and CWA members are so great at doing that, and they do it without even knowing that they're doing it. One of the points also made earlier was, and that we've all made throughout tonight's conversation, is about the importance of community doing some of the heavy lifting with this, and how we tend to send people off to therapy, but as a community perhaps we need to go to therapy. And I think it was you, Genevieve, that said that maybe as a community we need to go to therapy as a community. And I don't mean all going off to visit a counsellor, but I mean sessions like this where we can actually share and learn from each other. So whilst I don't have all the probably the correct clinical advice in relation to the right phrases. The other panellists can probably add to that. I just think the fact that you're all here tonight, willing to listen, willing to learn, and willing to go forth from events like this and have those conversations is hugely powerful.
I also think that I love the slogan, "Are you okay?" But a lot of times people don't take it any further than that. Everyone knows if you're asked, "Are you okay?" the first thing that pops to mind is, "Yeah, I'm all right, mate." The second part of that is, "Are you really okay?" And then give them the time to listen. Don't tell them what they want. Listen to the person. So, are you okay? Are you really okay? And see what comes back, because that's the conversation starter. And I think that if you allow people the time and not interrupt them, and practice your listening skills, because a lot of people don't listen. And "Are you okay?" is fantastic, and guaranteed your first response is going to be, "Yeah, mate, I'm okay," or "Yeah, it's all right," and if you take that one step further and say, "Are you really okay?" and then hold them to that. Don't let them run away, because as soon as they run away, you've lost them. So allow them and make the time in your day to listen to them, because those conversations will come out. And I think Steve is probably a pretty good advocate of that too.
As a community mental health advocate, I'm very pleased that the conversation has turned around from service provider focused, because I think at different times tonight, it's been pointed out, I think the girl next to David, Leanne, pointed out about the river. Dr. Joe talked about the importance of community. I'm involved at all different levels, and what I see is that if I'm at the community level, we all blame local government, state government, federal government. When I'm sitting on stuff with federal government, we blame the state government, the bloody community, whatever else. And ultimately, it comes back to the analogy of the river, okay? The reality is that our service providers are strapped to get the people already in the river at the top of the waterfall. It comes back to what Dr. Joe said, that he couldn't really put out there because everybody would hate him for it, but it does come back to us as a community. It's up to us to stop people going into dangerous sections of the river. When the going gets tough, it ain't weak to speak.
Well.
Yeah, thanks. That was great.
That was fantastic.
The only other thing is, you said you asked Bronwyn about starting a conversation, and the only other thing that popped into my head was that sometimes you've just got to be there. I mean, people aren't right, and they'll tell you that they are right, and you've just got to be there until they come round. You know, not come round, but you almost got to just check on them regularly, and they'll tell you they're okay, and you've got to build that trust. I don't know, I think that's right. I remember a couple of friends at uni, I went through a pretty bad time, and they just stuck with me for 6 months, and till I got out of it. But the whole time I was there, I would have been telling them I was okay. There's no way I was going to own up to anything like a weakness, and they just knew that I was in a bad state, and they stuck by me. And so sometimes it's not a question of even, it's just a question of being there sometimes and being aware of it. So I'll just put that out there. But that gentleman, thank you very much for your comments about the importance of community, because I actually think that is at the heart of what we're hopefully having a conversation about tonight. Thank you.
I think like you in yourself are the only person who is the authority of your mental health, and your lived experience is your, professionalism for yourself. And for me, how I sort of go about it, just like on a very colloquial way, is I will message someone and I'll say, hey, do you have capacity? And this person who I know that I trust, who is culturally safe for me, who is a close friend, will say yes or no, and then I'll be like, cool, and I'll alter myself then. And then the question that he'll say is, do you want a distraction? Do you want to talk about it, or do you want to be left alone? And that's sort of how I go about everything in my life. And I really understand what you're saying, but I feel like to pressure someone if it's not within their capacity is, like, you don't want to be ableist about it, because everyone exists somewhere in terms of their mental health. And I've met people who have a lot of stigma within themselves about their mental health, and they might not be ready and they might not be comfortable. So being there for someone is sometimes more than knowing exactly what to say or to do, and having options is really good for me, because it allows me to step back and be like, what do I really need? And then I can decide for myself what I need, and then my community can help me through that.
I think that exactly supports what Dr. Joe was talking about people being patient and sticking in there, hanging in there, and just being there over a long period of time. And that's the whole belief behind, are you okay? Have the patience. Are you really okay? And go back. It doesn't have to happen today. Check in again in a few days' time. Like, check in with people. This is where it all starts, on the ground level. The conversation is an ongoing thing. It's not immediate. So have the patience. And if that person hadn't have been, if those mates hadn't have been there for 6 months, then things could have been different. So I think that's that ongoing patience and checking in with people. And we're a community. We need to look after our community and the people within our community.
I think we've got a question up the back here.
Hi, I'm Penny from Sunflower House. I think, thank you first for having this. I'm really happy to be here, and I think it's really great that we're having these conversations. I think what I wanted to talk about is, I guess, the labels that we put on people, and also remembering that, say, someone with bipolar, schizophrenia, they've had that for quite a long time, and they don't mind the word being used, they don't mind the conversations being had, and I think it would be really good if people in the community acknowledged that and said how wonderful it is that they acknowledge their own mental illness as well, and to, I guess, talk about using those words like schizophrenia and bipolar and labelling them, but in a positive way. And just wondering if you guys agree with that.
Very much agree with that. And I think Steve Matthews here in the front, he talks about this through River in a Bluebell all of the time. It's about feeling comfortable, about owning and being part of that. And I think you, when we're at the back talking about this, spoke very positively about using the right language.
Yeah, I'm terrible with money, so I had a job within the NDIS for 6 weeks and then I quit. But my manager was really pivotal in my understanding, because I'd studied, I'd done the degree, I'd learned everything I could, and she really shaped she was like a learning curve for me, and I will never look back. And she's a voices hearer, and she said that, like, I hear voices, and it's my great privilege in my life to hear voices, and it's how I navigate the world. And within that job, like, none of my clients had their diagnoses on the paper. It was just like, this is the person, these are their needs. And it really is like, mental health is so diverse and beautiful and wonderful, and you can have so many incredible experiences within it, and it's not all negative. There's so much love and community.
Well said.
Hello, my name is Emma, and thank you, all of you, for participating tonight, and for everyone being here and asking sometimes the tough questions. I'm not sure if what I have to say is a question or as a comment, so we'll work it out at the end if there's a question mark on the end. But anyway, speaking about asking people if they're okay and being there to support people, I think it's also very important to know your own limitations as that person that is offering help. If someone says to you, no, I'm not doing okay, it is not our responsibility to fix them or even try and be their be-all and end-all to help them through. So I think it's very important as a community that we're aware of the services that are out there and our limitations as well, and say, thank you for sharing with me. I'm going to help you find the right people to speak to. Okay, there wasn't a question mark on the end, so it was just a comment.
No, wonderful comment though, thank you. And there is a table outside with there's a heap of pamphlets and paraphernalia around some of the services that are available. So please help yourself to those on your way out. You have a question?
I won't use all the correct technical jargon, so don't hold that against me. We're talking about conversations, but I'm sitting here thinking experiences we've had in communities I've been in where no one's identified a young person, no one in the family could pick it, and they took the ultimate step. So my question is, we're talking about having a conversation. It's been a fantastic night. And we're talking about community becoming more and more involved to keep them out of the river. How can we educate community better or more to look for the signs? Because if you don't see the signs, how do you know to have the conversation? I know you can ask, are you okay? Are you okay? I do that all the time. But is there more that can be done with identifying the signs? So if you don't see them, people sometimes put up that facade. No one ever knows. No one ever gets in. The family never even knows because they can't see. I don't know which question is part of that, but that's my thoughts from the night. How do we know what to look for as community members? Because you're suggesting we all go out and do it, which is great, the community should, but you've got to know what to look for.
It's a really interesting question, given, and thank you for that, because there's been so much advertising of different awareness courses and things like that online, things like QPR. So QPR, question, persuade and refer or respond, is a really simple online awareness program. It takes less than an hour to do. It's offered through ROC, it's offered through MLHD, it's Wellways offer it. Look, there's a lot of organisations here in Wagga doing it, and it's been heavily promoted on TV and through the media and that. And now we get a question is, where do we find this? Like, so I'm astounded by that. And sometimes when you work in the field, you miss what's happening out there. So a brilliant question, but I'm still astounded that the amount of media and the amount of promotional material that's been around through the organisations that are running that, and it's free. Like, it doesn't cost a cent. And the take-up, there's been thousands of people across the Riverina that have done QPR. And we still get a question that, what else, why, what do we need to do? So I'm not sure whether it's not being promoted enough, or, and sometimes we know if we promote stuff too much, then it gets missed. So I don't know where the happy place is, but there's definitely a lot of opportunities out there. Not just QPR, there's a lot of other organisations that are offering things like Safe Talk, and there's a number of awareness. Jump on Google and they're there. But yeah, I'd love people just to be more aware.
Just me again. Recently they've, I don't know the exact term, but I see now in schools they're bringing in educating about consent, and people fought a long time for that. Perhaps it's time we look at, and I was speaking to Anne earlier about this, teachers do so much already and we don't want to add more to their plate, but maybe, get rid of some stuff in the curriculums that's not as needed. And I've got a son who's a teacher and I know how hard they work. My second son's studying to be a teacher also. But getting back to, grassroots where it all starts, educating our really young people about feelings. Like Leanne was saying, kids have these, physical symptoms, and unless they're told, they
that's, I don't know, on that TV show, the lady was saying, he's having big feelings, you know, but educating our kids from when they're really young about this is what you're experiencing, and, I don't know, getting something into the curriculum, get rid of something that's, you know, trigonometry, algebra, I don't know. Get mental health into the curriculum from a really young age, and then hopefully we don't need all these services. Like, you know, nip it in the bud before it happens.
And then that's a really important point. Teachers really are expected to be everything and everything, and they can't be. So, yeah. Quick. Okay. Thanks, Anne.
Yurindu Jugan Gabaga Gabaga Galari Wiradjuri Yinya. My name is Sue Green. I'm a Galari Wiradjuri woman, and I'm also a social worker. And I'm academic at CSU working on the Wiradjuri language course. I think it's great we're having the conversation, but for me, I wonder when we're going to change the conversation from one that mental health is somehow divorced from every other part of our body. Our heads are still part of our body. It's not a separate thing. And what happens in other parts of our body will affect our mental health, and our mental health will affect other parts of our body. And as long as we keep talking about it as something completely separate, we allow it to keep being demonised, for want of a better word. Also, we keep separating our physical health from the environment we live in. And yet, the very environment we live in, both the physical world, and I hesitate to use the physical world, but in, you know, separating it from the social world, these things are not separated. If our waters are dirty, if our air's polluted, if the food we eat is contaminated, it's going to affect our bodies, and that includes our heads. If our social world is one of discrimination, is one where people are not accepted regardless of their race, their gender, their sexuality, their class, and every other ism you can find, people will continue to suffer. Until we can accept everybody in their wholeness, and until we can accept our place within the environment, within the ecosystem, we will continue to be sick. We need to change the conversation, because our head is not a separate illness, or where a separate illness resides, and we need to treat the person as the whole and treat them within their environment.
I'd just like to say that I agree so much, and I'm a little nerd, so I really want to study planetary health and permaculture and all these practices where it really looks at people as a holistic being. And for me and my well-being, it's not just mental health, it's spiritual health, it's financial, I think I said this before, financial health, physical health, and it's how all of those things interact on a day-to-day basis. So my physical health is here, I'm not going to the gym, I'm not feeling it, but my mental health is here because I'm watching Shrek for the 3rd time. Like, we are beings that were put here to run around naked and have fun, and we live in this society with all these rules. And it really is like planetary health, I think, is this like niche that I found, and it's very, very interesting, and it's very important in the health sector.
Yeah. I think we've got one, we've gone a little over time, so I'm just conscious of that. We've got one last question up here, and then we've got a number of calls for some federal comment. So maybe Mr. McCormack, if we can just have this lady's been very patiently waiting up the back, and then we'll come to Mr. McCormack.
I just wanted to say that here in the schools in the Wagga district, there is definitely a program for children to express themselves. I'm a grandmother, and I think mental health starts the minute you're born. It's part of being who you are, and I spend a lot of time answering questions with my grandchildren. But a program my young granddaughter took place in at one of the local primary schools was discussing how you feel and who's your safe person in the school to go and talk to. And each child was asked to name 2 people on staff that they knew was a safe person to go and tell them anything they needed to talk about. And she came home and told us about it, and all of the children took part in that program. And so most definitely in this area, teachers are trying very, very hard. And anyone that's a parent or grandparent should understand, yes, your child is being told there are safe people that are not necessarily mum and dad.
Thank you. Thanks, Tony.
Was there a question?
There is, but it's more along the lines of what, there's a couple of questions that allude to around some of the funding and the services that are available, and, they're being formed in many shapes and sizes as far as the questions go, whether it's about local services and access and waiting times and the amount of money. What is the federal government? It's one thing about the state level, but what's the bigger picture around services?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks to Danica from the CWA as the head of the organisation in New South Wales, and to the Quinny Evening Branch. Thank you for putting this on tonight, and thank you to all of our panellists, but also to everybody in the audience. I could talk to the $2.3 billion record funding that we put in last year's federal budget, and I'm sure given our commitment to mental health and given the area of concern that it is, there will be similar funding, I would like to think, in this year's budget. It is an area that I think the panel, David, spoke about 20 years ago. There wasn't this sort of commitment, not just on a federal or state funding perspective, but indeed there wasn't this sort of commitment by community. There weren't that many people putting their hand up, and there certainly weren't the services that there are now. And we'll continue to work with the state to provide those services. I know Dr. Joe commented earlier, it's very difficult to actually get people out. We've got a special unit in the Murrumbidgee Local Health District just trying to retain those specialists, not just in the mental health area, but in other areas of endeavour as well. And I can well recall going to the particular unit next to Wagga Wagga Base Hospital. I think it was called the Rural Referral Hospital at the time, when it was opened through state and federal funding, and someone there commented that it's got 55 beds. I'm not quite sure for once a government has built this with a vision to the future, because it'll take us quite a while to fill up. And a month later, the first patient was turned away. And, it is a growing area of concern. There are significant gaps in the mental health, in psychology and psychiatry services that we do need to address. Fiona Nash has just been appointed as not only as a a rural education commissioner, but we've got a specialist rural health commissioner as well, and they're working to address those gaps both in the schools that was addressed earlier this evening. But one word that really hasn't been mentioned a lot tonight is family. I know we've mentioned a lot about community and what we should do as a community, but there are areas where families too play a really important part in the prevention rather than just the cure, but also the cure side of things. And look, we will continue as the federal government, and I'll continue as the federal member, hopefully beyond the election, to work towards plugging some of those services, to getting specialists in, and not just in a locum sort of area, but certainly getting them to come to areas such as Wagga Wagga and stay. But it's not just about Wagga Wagga as a city. We do reasonably well here in this city as far as all health services. It's also the little towns like Junee and Cowra and Parkes and Forbes and Temora that I represent, Lockhart, where there are big gaps as well, and they have even more vulnerable access to services, and particularly in the Wiradjuri community, it is very, very difficult, and that's why we have funded more Headspace facilities. I'm proud to work with Shane in the Wagga Headspace, and we're just opening up one at Cowra. Still gaps there, but we'll continue to work to try to address those areas of concern.
I guess one of the things I would ask around that, though, is that appears to be a lot of money being thrown at services. One of the criticisms, I guess, or the challenges of government money and programs is the compliance and the red tape that ties up, and it narrows the ability to deliver. So one of the things that's come up through so many conversations leading up to today is a lot to do with some creativity in how those services get delivered. Yes, there's understanding around the core of what those services are, but what we're hearing tonight too is where's the latitude when there's people are putting in for government funding for some elasticity in how those funds get used to deliver those services, because it's the outliers. The core is in the, there's so much more diversity in what's required, and how is that going to get delivered in less traditional ways?
Look, and indeed, and even using organisations such as the FRRR, as the CWA, as the Wagga Women's Health Centre, to provide some of those services, which might be through people who are trained, of course, but also who might be well-meaning volunteers to provide and fill some of those gaps that we have in service delivery. And so we'll continue to look at things like that and continue to fund those sorts of organisations to enable the community to provide those services.
Can I add that I actually, look, the State Health Department can be the most bureaucratic beast known to man, although it did a pretty good job in the COVID pandemic, can I say, because it was so highly structured. But I have to say, I've been quite impressed with some of the flexibility they've had around programs. And I think the Safe Haven, the outreach teams, the local response group that I mentioned earlier, they're different models that are being tried. And part of the problem is we do not know what's going to work. And so we do have to have that flexibility. But I think there is a genuine attempt to do that. And can I just say, Michael, the funding that goes to the PHNs for mental health, they contract with a range of providers. And I have to say that's seen a burgeoning of services in very different formats. So, yep, we do need to be flexible because this isn't something we know the answer to. But I'm not so pessimistic that we aren't trying. I just don't want to say that.
Yes. Thank you so much.
I would say that, wouldn't I?
Yeah, you would. But I am aware of time, and we've got entertainment waiting for you and food outside. So tonight has been a really important conversation, and I'm really pleased with the variety of questions that we've had tonight, and also the questions that have come in on Slido. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panellists tonight. Thank you. Of course, nights like this don't happen on their own. Firstly, I'd like to I wrote myself a note and I can't read it. That was helpful, wasn't it? All right. So thank you to Michelle, table and graze, which you'll be partaking of very, very shortly. Jackie, the photographer, Jack of Hearts, running around taking some wonderful photos tonight. We'll have entertainment by Zoe. Local love in a box for the gifts for the panellists. And the wonderful, wonderful flowers. Our very own Anne Adams has done the flower arrangements for this evening. And thank you. Thank you to Pyrus, our tech doing the live streaming. Thank you everyone that has given up their time tonight to come. And also, of course, the CWA. Thank you so much for taking on the hard topics and continuing to be such an important part of the community. So thank you everyone. So please join us for refreshments. The bar will be open. There's music out the back. And enjoy. Thank you for coming.